As a lifelong environmentalist, our next guest has championed his company's sustainability strategy and established the world's first automotive plant to use 25% post-consumer materials in all its plastic parts. He also has been instrumental in investing in wirelessly connected intelligent vehicles and projects that bridge the divide between the technological innovation and manufacturing. Please welcome Executive Chairman of the Ford Motor Company, Bill Ford, with Fortune and Time Inc.'s Alan Murray.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill, for being with us. You're here in China as part of a big tour, and you're making some news. Can you talk a little bit about what Ford's doing in China?
Well, yeah,
big commitment.
Well, we are doing a lot in China. We announced that we've got a joint venture on electric vehicles here, 50-50 JV. We've just announced we're doing 50 new vehicles in China for Ford and the Lincoln brand. We're electrifying our fleet here very quickly. And then by the end of 2019, all our vehicles will be connected vehicles in terms of modems in them. So,
and why the big push in China?
I mean, China's a great market for us, has been and will continue to be. Importantly, though, China's really taking the lead on electric vehicles. There's a real push to clean up the air, as you well know. And as part of that, there's been a big push towards electrification here. And there's great technical ability in terms of electrification.
So you have been pushing for electric vehicles for, 20 years? I mean, I remember hearing you and talking to you about this a long time ago, but it's been very, very slow in coming. Why has it taken so long to come?
Well, the answer is a little different all around the world, but in the U.S. In particular, it's been slow because the infrastructure build-out was slow. Batteries were expensive. Batteries took up a lot of space. And then individual customers worried about range. So you had range anxiety, you had cost issues, you had weight issues, all these different things. Of course, that's all changing now. Batteries are changing, the range issues are largely starting to disappear, the cost is coming down. But there's still going to be, I think, a big question mark as we push to electrify in terms of the retail customer actually accepting it in great numbers. And that's always a risk with new technology.
Do you think China is going to be the lead in adoption of electric vehicles?
I think China very well could be the lead, yeah. And I think that the partner that we're working with here on a new brand, basically, for electric vehicles, Zhongtai, they've got really impressive technology at a very competitive cost basis. And that's really what you need. You need range, you need cost, so that the retail customer doesn't get choked out of the marketplace.
Do you also have government assistance on the infrastructure front, or?
Well, I think it's part of electrification. The one thing you don't worry about in China so much is once they decide to do something, it'll happen.
It happens.
Yes.
A little different in the U.S.?
It is different, although it's, that's happening too.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's hard to think of any industry that has been buffeted by as much change as the auto industry right now. You're talking about electrification, but that's only one of sort of 4 concurrent revolutions that are going on. You have electrification, you have autonomous vehicles, you have ride sharing, you have the whole connected car phenomena, which will change the way people consume information. And
I would add to that 3D printing, artificial intelligence, deep learning. Yeah, you could go on and on and on.
Ford was a revolutionary company in mass producing cars for the middle class, but this feels as big or bigger than that, doesn't it?
I think it's awesome. It's really the most interesting time in my working career. I absolutely love it because if for the first time, we're going to have real winners and losers in our industry, and if those who get it right are going to end up less capital intensive, less cyclical, higher margin, much better relationship with customers, and really helping solve society's problems. Those who get it wrong will either not exist or will be low margin assemblers of other people's stuff. So
you talk about winners and losers. There's sort of a tendency on the West Coast in the U.S. to assume the winners will be the disruptors, the Teslas, the Ubers, the Googles. You know, when I drive now, I use Wave as my navigation device. How do you take a legacy company and compete with those guys?
Well, it's interesting. I think if we were having this discussion 2 years ago, that would have been the prevailing thought. Two things have happened since. One is a lot of those companies have found it's really hard to not only make a vehicle, but to actually integrate technology into a vehicle. And so the other is the intellectual property that we have is people are just starting to realize, wow, you guys haven't been asleep at the switch. You have been investing in these new solutions. And so, but your basic thesis, I think, is correct in that you're going to see lots of partnerships between big tech companies, startup companies, and OEMs, and also some of the traditional suppliers. It's going to be a very different world for us as we go forward than the past. Because, you know, you think of the past, we had a very prescribed supply chain that was kind of captive in some respects to the auto industry. And that whole model is being, you know, to use your word, disrupted. But I look at us and I say, hey, look, we were the original disruptors in transportation. That's really part of our DNA. You know, we should be play that role again.
And what can you do to make sure that you don't get that you do play that role? I mean, one thing you've done, by the way, is you've changed CEOs recently. I mean, your CEOs don't seem to stay for too long.
Well, some of them do, and some of them don't. But I think that, you know, in terms of Jim Hackett, you know, I was looking for somebody who could do two very difficult things simultaneously. One is to run the day-to-day business, because even as we're imagining this fantastic future, you've got to make great cars and trucks today. And then somebody also who could be a thought partner for me on delivering the long term, and Jim is a big thinker. You know, he was a 20-year CEO at Steelcase and completely transformed that company during his time, and they had great runs of profitability, and you know, his operating metrics were fantastic. But he also reimagined what the workspace might be, and in doing so, took Steelcase to #1 in his industry. And I'd known Jim a long time, and he, in fact, was on our board, and I thought he would be a perfect partner to help do these two things at once, because each one is hard enough to do by itself. To try and do it at the same time, that requires special leadership.
So which of the five, electric, autonomous, ride-sharing, connected, 3D printing and manufacturing, which of those five is the most difficult?
Probably autonomous vehicles, because there's so many elements to that. You not only have to have a smart vehicle, you have to have smart cities. You have to have, you know, we have to have a discussion somewhere about ethics and trust and all the things that have to happen on the soft side. I think that's one of the discussions when we talk about technology. It's very easy to get captivated and fall in love with the tech. But you have to take a step back and say to yourself, is this actually helping people, individual customers, and is it helping society? And in order to do that, you actually have to answer some of these softer questions perhaps first. So it's not only trust and ethics, which have to be discussed before you unveil these, but also things like job displacement. There's going to be enormous changes in the workforce as a lot of these forces come into place. And I think that, you know, they need to be discussed beforehand, because they're going to have profound implications for society, for the education system, and really for, you know, all of us. And I think that, so you ask which the toughest question. I think autonomous vehicles sort of in many ways encompasses all of those issues.
Because of the social implications.
The social implications, and also of the technology itself.
Yeah.
You know, the ethics of the technology has to be sorted out before it's ready for prime time. All the other things we discussed are mostly delivering the technology in a way that the customer will find attractive.
Yeah.
And in the case of 3D printing, that's really much more about an internal process.
On the social implications of autonomous, what's the responsibility of a company like Ford? I mean, let's just take the most obvious example. If we put autonomous trucks on the road in the U.S., you're eliminating the #1 employer of men without college educations.
Right.
What's the responsibility of Ford in that?
Well, I think the responsibility for us is to start the dialogue. We can't solve all the problems ourselves, and I don't think anyone would expect us to. But what we can do is highlight it so that as a society we're starting to work on it. And I believe also, but it's not just the costs, there are great benefits too, by the way. So if you think of I gave a TED talk in 2011 talking about global gridlock and the fact that everybody was focusing on clean transportation, which I was too. But I said, look, even if we solve that problem, we're still going to have a clean traffic jam is still a traffic jam. So we have to solve two problems. One is we have to clean up the air. The other is we have to solve this enormous congestion issue, which I believe autonomous vehicles can help do. But it does require the vehicles and the cities to really act as one brain. And that's going to take some work.
I just want to point, I think maybe most people know this, but it really is true. You were way ahead of your time and of most people on these issues. I mean, you were talking about them 20 years ago. You were pushing electric vehicles, talking about the problems we were going to have in cities. It must have been a little frustrating for you to sort of see this coming, but have this giant legacy company and struggle to get it to move off the dime in the direction you thought things were going.
It really wasn't so much that. I think the technology wasn't mature enough to really deliver to customers and society the kind of things that we were talking about. So if you think back, electric vehicles at that time were pretty rough. They had, they were heavy, the batteries, they were lead acid batteries. I drove an electric Ranger pickup, and the entire pickup bed was filled with batteries. I mean, so that wasn't a terribly appealing thing to most people. Same thing with congestion issues. Yeah, I was highlighting the issues. We didn't have a lot of solutions back then. Now we do, and now we can really start to work on implementing. And I think it's terrific. It's incredibly exciting, but technology will set us free if we do it thoughtfully. And that, to me, is the most important part, is we have to do it thoughtfully.
So in addition to Ford having been a pioneer of mass manufacturing of middle-class vehicles, you were also a pioneer post-World War II of globalized supply chains all over the world. And then last year, you got maybe one of the biggest hits when Donald Trump, running for president, attacked your company head-on for manufacturing cars in Mexico.
Yeah, I went to go see him on that.
So what did you say?
Well, I just said the facts weren't right, and we had a long talk, and actually a very good talk about trade, about taxes, about employment. Look, we've been a global company for 114 years, and we've done business all around the world, and it's not a zero-sum game. I mean, Ford will invest in China, Ford will invest in the U.S., Ford will invest elsewhere in the world, and we can grow employment and grow opportunities, multiple places. It's not and I think that was the biggest thing, it's not a zero-sum game.
Do you think you made any progress in?
I hope so. I mean, and I think that.
But he pulled out of NAFTA, which was critical to the way you were operating.
Well, I mean, a lot of businesses in the U.S. had built their modern business around the notion of NAFTA, and it's not just it's Canada too. It's not just Mexico, and so. And we're still working with the administration on those kinds of issues, and we will. I mean, the nice thing is we have a voice, and we're going to continue to work on it.
Yeah, I want to open it up to questions in just a minute, but do you want to? It looks like we're getting close to passing a tax reform bill in the U.S. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm happy that the corporate rate's coming down because I think that's important, and I feel that the U.S. rate was kind of an outlier, and it really was kind of creating some abnormal behavior by some companies. So to the extent that that'll get corrected, I think that's good. The rest of the bill, I think it's on balance positive. Of course, they haven't had the caucus yet between the House and the Senate, so we don't really know what the final version is going to be. But on balance, yeah, I think it's good.
The Trump administration's argument is that rationalizing the corporate tax will lead companies like Ford to invest more in the U.S. Will it lead Ford to invest more in the U.S.?
Well, I don't think, it's interesting. I don't, for us, we've not really been our business hasn't been driven by tax policy. So we've been investing all along anyway and creating new jobs in the U.S. for, ever since the Great Recession. We've actually been kind of a tear.
So you don't think it'll make a big difference?
I mean, it'll certainly help us, retain our earnings and to reinvest. Yes, I do. But in some respects, we were kind of doing that anyway.
Yeah. Do we have anyone have questions? Yeah, question, Nathan, right up here in the front. It's coming. Introduce yourself, please.
Nathan Rosenberg from Insigniam. When you guys bought Range Rover and Volvo, and then that experiment didn't work, can you talk about what lessons were learned out of those acquisitions and kind of why you think it didn't work? Because as one of your customers, I really appreciate that you taught them how to make cars.
Well, it was sort of a, well, thank you. It was less of a function of it not working and more one of timing. We got into a heck of a crunch during the, 05, 06, 07, 08 time period. And, thankfully, we didn't go bankrupt and we didn't take the bailout and we did pay back all our debt. And I feel very proud of that. But unfortunately, some of the tough actions we had to take was we had to divest ourselves of Aston Martin, Land Rover, Jaguar, Volvo, as you point out. And those are all great brands. And, I'm happy to see that most of them are doing really well on, under new ownership because, part of those vehicles are ones that we developed that then hit the marketplace under new ownership. So I kind of feel a real kind of draw to them because I know the people that work there and I'm really happy they're doing well. And, had we not gone through the downturn, would we have made a different set of decisions? Yes, probably.
Other questions? Back there in the back?
Thank you. James Sassoon of Jardine Matheson. Very, very interesting, Mr. Ford. Thank you. One of the things you said was getting closer to the end customer, I think, and I just wondered what that means for the dealer model of selling your cars. Is it the death of the dealer? What's going to be the sales channel in the future?
Well, actually, it's interesting. A lot of people think that the dealer model is an albatross. I actually think it's a great opportunity. We have touch points all around the globe. We also have service capability all around the globe. And if you think of, a world of autonomous vehicles, those dealers that are in urban areas are going to have tremendous service opportunities around that. Will their sales mix change? Yeah, probably. But I think the business opportunities around all this will also benefit the dealers. Because servicing a vehicle and doing it well is something that's going to be needed regardless of what form of propulsion or whether we have a driver or not. You could make the case actually it's even more important without a driver. So will our dealer business models change? Yeah, probably. We're working very closely with them to make sure it works for them as well as works for us. But I actually think it's an advantage, as I said, not an albatross.
Other questions? Right here. Get the microphone, please. It's right behind you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon. What do you think of the Chinese market now? Chinese market in new energy vehicles? Thank you.
Yes. So thank you for the question. So I think China has a big push behind the new energy vehicles, and I think it's a really good thing. And China absolutely can pull it off. One of the things I'm most encouraged by, though, is the cost position in a lot of these new energy vehicles because, again, they have to be affordable to the customer. So I think we Ford have a big push on electrification in China. I think it'll be successful. I think China, in typical China fashion, when they want something to happen, it will happen. And it's a very positive thing. So I'm very bullish on the outcome of electric vehicles in China.
What will the price point be on these?
Well, they'll be all over the place. And I think,
the lowest price point.
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. So, on some of our joint venture, they'll be certainly below what our current Ford and Lincoln prices are. But we're also electrifying the Ford and Lincoln brands, too. So we'll have an array of prices available to customers. And I think we need to make it really work.
Others? Yes, sir, right here.
Hi, Andy Mock, CGTN. There's, of course, a lot of talk now about China's role in the Belt and Road Initiative and spurring investment and manufacturing along these particularly lesser developed countries. Do you see a role for companies like Ford in there?
I missed part of the question. Did you get the whole question?
No, the first part got a
about China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Oh, Belt and Road.
Yeah. So there's encouragement of many companies to support the Belt and Road Initiative through investment, manufacturing. Do you see much of a role, or what role do you see for Ford?
Yeah, I mean, there might be, and I think clearly, manufacturing is what we're good at. We've done it all around the world. We've done it with different partners, and we've done it in different economies. Importantly, and so yes, we can be very helpful. I don't know that exactly what role we will play, but if asked to play, yes, we can be very helpful.
One of the things that you've talked about for some time is the urbanization and the problems of urbanization, which is obviously going to be part of this rapid development process.
Well, yeah, and if you think about urbanization, if we go really from 7 billion people in the world to 9.5 to 10 billion, and at that same time there's urbanization growth, all these gridlock issues just become worse. I mean, actually, there was a study done in China very recently on people trying to get to emergency health care. They can't get to the hospital. They're stuck in traffic. And so one of the great things about when autonomy comes into play, it should do a lot of things. Number one, it should enable people to easily get to health care. Number two, there have been studies all around the globe that said part of the problem with poverty is people don't live where the jobs are, and they can't get to where the jobs are. But if we can provide low-cost solutions with dynamic shuttles and autonomous dynamic shuttles, things like that can actually go to where people live and get them to where the jobs are, that will be a really great thing. So there's, with autonomy, there are questions, but there are also enormous benefits.
There's a company here in Guangzhou called Yihang that's developing a manned drone. Do you think flying autonomous vehicles are part of the answer for cities? They could be, but you think about congestion on the ground. I mean, we could easily have congestion in the air too, which is not something anybody wants. And the other thing is AVs have to prove themselves that they can go in 2 dimensions before they can go in 3. Certainly you have AV drones that can go up now, but they're not carrying people. Yeah. As soon as you start dealing with people's lives, it's a different equation, and you better have real certainty before you launch, whether it's a car AV or a drone AV that carries people. All these issues really have to be, you can't work them out on the fly, so to speak. You've got to really know what you're doing. So that's where, people kind of play it fast and loose with the AV stuff. Oh, we're going to have AVs on the road by X, we're going to have AVs on the road by Y. I don't want to play that game, because it's much more important that we get it right. Get it right.
Yes, because again, it all comes down to trust.
Yeah. Bill Ford, thank you very much. Fascinating conversation.
Good to see you.
Great to have you here at the Fortune Global Forum.